Okay, hello people of YouTube land, those that are part of the Cringe Crew Gaming community Discord, those that follow Ted, and our guest Bud
Hello.
on Twitch, and those that may be listening to this on Spotify or whatever streaming audio platform this gets put on. Like I said, scuffed as usual, and this is the Cringe Crew gaming film review. Shit, it's movie review podcast. Damn it!
Just
You're
one
doing
time.
great, Stahlman.
So the first, I don't know how much of these you've watched, Bud, but the first time I didn't tell him the title as we switched from James Bond to the movie review podcast. I threw a title on and didn't tell him, and I think he just gets in his own head now that he can't get the title out because he's too busy thinking about what the title is, and I think the panic just sets in and gets in the way.
Fair enough.
It's exactly it, because this is like the fourth time that I screwed this up.
Yeah, fourth time in 11 movies. It's a pretty good percentage.
Yeah. And
Nice.
what we do with this podcast is we take a director's filmography and we review it. And we decided to start out with Christopher Nolan. If you've watched this before, you would know that we decided Christopher Nolan because it's kind of like the reverse of the James Bond podcast. With the James Bond podcast, I am the huge James Bond fan. Ted was a, filthy casual. This is in reverse. Ted is a huge Christopher Nolan fan. I'm the filthy casual. And here's a film that I only saw while plastered. So I didn't remember anything of it except for the beginning. So
Great.
yeah, try following that while,
This
being hammered, then passing out, then waking up. Hey, what's going on?
it's a rough movie to jump into hammered. But Tenet is one of my favorite films of all time, so just be prepared for that.
I think I have
Yeah.
to agree with that statement.
But anyway, as we were saying, we have Budward, the third founder of the Cringe Crew. Finally got Budward on a one of these podcasts.
Yes, sir.
And we're going to be talking about Tenet. And Tenet was released in 2020, so 3 years ago. This is going to be the last Christopher Nolan movie that we're going to be reviewing until Oppenheimer comes out. But we do have a plan for, filling in during that time and things. Now, where was it? Okay, it was released in the United Kingdom August 26, 2020, and then in the United States September 3rd of 2020, and had a budget of $205 million with a box office return of $365.3 million.
Son of a bitch.
To be honest, I'm surprised it's that.
Well,
Not just like, I'm not saying how low the box office is, but how low the budget is of this movie.
the budget surprises me a bit, but I also know that they did a whole lot of things practically. There were a whole lot of things that were just one solid take that cuts down on that budget a lot. But there is a significant amount that's kind of surprising. As far as the budget goes, though, I mean, a lot of that was it's a pandemic movie. I mean, when this movie was released is when you heard Christopher Nolan make a jackass of himself because my movies demand to be seen on a big screen, not your home theater. It's a movie theater movie. Go see it in the theaters. I don't care about COVID.
A little based, if you ask me.
Still less of an egotistical asshole than James Cameron.
Fair.
That being said, we have the cast as the protagonist. Wow, I'm surprised that character's actually not even named besides.
Yeah, no, he does not have a name. Like, it never comes up in the film.
He's
and
just
that
the
is the
protagonist.
actor John David Washington, who is known for his breakthrough role of Ron Stallworth in Spike Lee's crime film Black Klansman, and that role in that movie is what got him the role in this movie. Which I will recommend actually watching Black Klansman, and also the story behind the true story behind that movie. because it's actually really interesting. Black man joins the KKK to a black police officer joins the KKK to infiltrate the Klan and shut it down. So crazy how that actually happened in real life. We also have Robert Pattinson as Neil, who is the protagonist's handler. Elizabeth Debicki as Catherine Cat Barton, niece of Sir Frederick Barton, art appraiser, and the one character, Andre Sator, played by Kenneth Branagh. That's his not real life wife, but wife in this movie. And Kenneth Branagh's Andre Sator is a British domiciled Russian oligarch from the fictional Soviet era closed city of Stalsk 12, who is a arms dealer. We have Dimple Kapadia as Priya Singh, an Indian arms trafficker. We have Michael Caine. Yes, I know, Alfred. Now, no, you're gonna tell me that, you asshole.
Yes, his name's Alfred.
As Sir Michael Crosby, British intelligence officer. It's Christopher Nolan movie past Batman Begins. It has to have Michael Caine in it.
Alfred.
Oddly enough, Kenneth Branagh was in Dunkirk, so we actually have our first crossover with him. So there's that. Martin Donovan as Faye, the protagonist's CIA boss.
I think the only other notable character you're missing is Ives.
Oh, he's wow, we actually have our first freaking crossover from Insomnia with Martin Donovan.
Interesting.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, he's the one that Al Pacino shoots. That's not Robin Williams.
You know what? Actually,
Sorry,
now that you say that,
I ruined that movie for you.
No, now that you say that, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then that's about. Cause...
I was gonna say, I think Ives is the only character you're missing from that list.
Oh, Aaron Taylor Johnson as Ives, who plays what the hell? Quicksilver in Age of Ultron. So we got that. Now, Christopher Nolan said he could see the ideas behind Tenet over a course of 20 years, but began writing the script in 2014. The title comes from being a palindrome and also allusion to the Sator Square, which is a 5-word Latin palindrome itself. And was inspired by a feeling on how he imagines how Sergio Leone made Once Upon a Time in the West. And to prepare for the film, Nolan decided not to watch any spy films that might influence him, instead of relying on his memories of spy films that have inspired him, which I'll probably get into with likes and dislikes of hey, I think I see some Easter eggs here.
Well, the idea that he wanted his movie to have influences from other spy movies, and in doing so, he says, "I'm not watching spy movies. I want to just remember it, and that's how I'm doing." That's fucking weird, bro. That's fucking weird.
I mean, this is also the same person that's still filming in IMAX because
fair.
So, funny thing about during casting, Washington, Pattinson, and Debicki, while they were cast in March 2019, they were only permitted to read the screenplay while locked in a room.
Huh.
He's such a weird dude.
He makes good movies.
He makes great movies.
Tarantino.
He's just a fucking weird dude.
And
was gonna say, if that does it for cast, I think we'll move to plot.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that
gonna move to plot.
this one's gonna be a long one, and I know it is. It's unavoidable. So the plot is both simple and complicated at the same time. To really boil it down, basically you catch up with the protagonist as a part of a CIA mission. He gets brought into this other program that's not CIA related because the government believes that he's dead. He's then chasing this arms dealer to find missing plutonium. Through that chase, they recognize that there is the ability to not quite reverse time, but to put yourself through time in reverse. And then it turns into a spy chase, essentially, but while playing around with the concepts of bending time.
I'm sorry about my reaction, but it popped in my head that fucking scene from Freddy Got Fingered with Tom Green dressed in like his clothes backwards. He goes, "I can walk backwards fast as you can. The backwards man.
What the fuck goes on in your brain? What the fuck goes on in your brain? All right. I think
looks confused.
I think we're just gonna take this and jump straight into likes and dislikes. Bud, I know that you and I our lists look pretty similar, so I feel like it's you might as well start. Just hit me with some likes. What you got?
All right, so I love the cinematography in this film. I think that all the shots were fantastic. I think that there were moments where actors performed subtleties with their bodies and their motions that, once noticed, apply a greater depth to the scene that they're in. All like the action scenes, while they were jump cutty, they weren't abused like most Marvel movies are nowadays, where it's, all right, here's half a punch and then a jump cut to the dude taking the other half of the punch, and then a jump cut to him taking a left step, and then a jump cut to them jumping, and then another jump cut. 75 jump cuts to have some dude jump on a table and run out of a tavern. The action scenes in this were, the jump cuts existed as a way to pan between each individual takedown. There's a scene about halfway through where the protagonist is moving through the back of a kitchen for a restaurant, and each individual person that he takes down, it's all done in one continuous shot. And then when that person has been taken down, then it jump cuts to a different angle where then the protagonist interacts with another bad guy and takes him out, all in one continuous shot. It's 6 bad guys, 6 jump cuts. It feels good, it's easy to follow, you know what's going on, and you don't feel like you've been cheated out of an action scene via overuse of editing and CGI. There were some themes going on with red, like coloring, like red and blue. They're subtle, they're not, you don't really expect to see them much, but if you pay attention, they're there throughout the whole movie, and not just where it gets, there's red team and blue team at the end of the movie. Like, the red and blue coloring takes place throughout the movie, and I actually, I loved the way that this movie was shot. I think every scene had a purpose. Every jump cut had a purpose, and there was no cop-outs. There were no cheap shots, like literal cheap shots, like trying to make something seem cooler than it was.
Yeah, similarly, everything felt believable. There were no continuity errors. There was like the one scene that always fascinates me. There's when they drive the plane into the art vault building at the airport.
Yeah,
that's done as a practical effect. There's no CGI. There was no secondary cuts. It was giving you a lot of camera angles that all felt effective, told the story, and then they actually crashed a plane into a building. Like they did it. Everything was practical. Everything was really smooth.
It felt good. It felt appropriate. It didn't look forced. Like, it felt natural.
Yeah,
watching that.
And similarly, like you mentioned, Bud, like the body actions were really notable. I think that goes more towards acting than the cinematography necessarily, but like
that's true.
I was gonna say
but the cinematography was there to display it.
Right.
It was the center of that shot, and if you didn't see it, the shot was still good. But if you saw it, that shot was all the better.
Right. The camera angles, I mean, Bud and I were talking while the movie was going that, like, just the way that characters move their eyes, right?
Yeah, eye contact.
Like you mentioned, I mean, like, not only is that phenomenal acting or stage direct, I don't even know if it was happenstance or on purpose for a majority of those eye movements that, like,
it was on purpose.
Were notable,
he asked for that.
But like, there was camera shots to establish them that made them important when they didn't necessarily, like, they became important.
You go through the first time before they meet the first turnstile. You go through and you see the protagonist's eyes dart left and right, and he looks at a car. And you're like, well, that was weird. I mean, yeah, okay, so he saw the car. What of it? You move on. Then when you're going through that scene on the other side, coming in reverse, if you will, the shot then is from inside the car that the protagonist looks at, where the protagonist is also in. Like, he's in the car that is driving in reverse, and he's in the car that's driving in normal time.
But you still see the eye movements.
And you still see the eye movements where, he wasn't looking at the car, he was looking at himself in the car. And that makes it all the more impactful.
Which I have to... before I get into things, so I do have a question.
Sure.
Did anybody pay attention to what kind of car that was?
Not a clue.
I
wasn't it a BMW?
So the car that Neil and the protagonist were in was a BMW. The car that he gets into, I believe, is an Audi, but I don't remember necessarily.
Okay, I was thinking, because I knew one was a BMW, and I was thinking, I'm like, I know it's a silver car, but I'm just thinking, like, in my head, with, like, how I was kind of thinking, I'm like, I swear to God, if that was an Aston Martin,
it was certainly not an Aston Martin. No, the BMW was the car they started in, but that's the other thing that that, like, I want to jump back to myself on.
Of course, yeah. Go ahead.
So
what did you like?
There's. This movie is very difficult to conceptualize, right? Like, there's a lot of reversing in time. There's a lot of characters that exist in the same location at multiple points in time. Like, the story that you follow is very smooth for how convoluted it is. But the longer you think about it, the more this movie makes sense. There's no continuity errors. There's no, like, the only real
and if
gap.
There are continuity errors. They're not glaringly obvious.
The only real gap that I would say is notable is in that car chase scene where the car is zooming in reverse. There would be nobody to press the gas for it moving forward in reverse.
When once Sator
gets out of the vehicle.
Yeah, he gets out of that vehicle to go pick up the plutonium. And he sends that vehicle in reverse. There's no one driving that car. That's the only thing that I would find to be bothersome, because that car is actively slowing down and speeding up.
Yeah.
And maintaining a straight line in reverse.
Yeah. I didn't
really
beyond that.
Anything else that happens, like, you know, if you got lit on fire while traveling in reverse, I don't know if your skin would freeze. Like, it's not a thing that we'll ever be able to test, but they explained those holes for themselves to make sure that it stayed continuous and reasonably believable. Right. Like, they gave themselves, like, they had them put on oxygen masks, which helped.
It works in the context in the movie.
Yeah, well, and they had to wear oxygen masks because the oxygen can't pass through the membranes of the lungs in reverse time, right? But, like, not only did that help,
I never would have thought of that.
Right,
you know?
It's something that they thought about, and whether it's accurate or not only did it make it a continuously believable thing throughout the movie where they're establishing directions, it also makes it easier as a viewer to know, okay, this person's moving forward because there's no mask, this person's moving backwards because they have a mask. Like, everything they do is done with, if not one, multiple purposes that just makes everything in this movie super smooth despite how convoluted it should be.
Correct.
Well, here's a fun fact. The person that helped work with Nolan on Interstellar also helped out with some of the science stuff in this movie as well. So,
credit to that guy, but also, like, a lot of this is, like, a lot of it's conjecture. Like, we'll never be able to move backwards. We're never going to fucking know. There's certain limitations I think you have to exist in. Like, it's not like moving backwards means we actually breathe fire, right? Like, there's certain limits you have to stick to. But, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, they did a really good job keeping everything cohesive for the movie. It flowed really smoothly. And
then I think the only other thing that I had that I at least wanted to touch base on was that red-blue theming that I mentioned at the beginning there. They mention when you first go in reverse, like, if they go out of their way to mention, like, yeah, if you touch fire, you're gonna get not burned, you'll get frostbite. And, you know, going in reverse, your reversed entropy is what they're calling it. And don't get me started on that. Ted and I were talking about entropy before this, and that could be a budcast.
Or several.
It probably could be. Entropy is the quantification of randomness. That's the best way. Anyways, reverse entropy, you are reducing the amount of heat energy, if you will, because you're reversing the entropy of the world. Therefore, cold blue. When you're going forward through time, this randomness generates energy that then dissipates hot red. So in the turnstile, the first one we go to where the interrogation's happening, like, where did you leave that box? The protagonist's side is all red colored. Like, there's red lights going on. And then when he moves through the turnstile for the first time, everything on that side is blue to signify going backwards. And I think it's in remarks to when he is caught in a vehicle explosion and freezes to death because he's going in reverse. I think it has something to do with, you know, color theming in terms of reverse entropy, not reverse entropy. And then that plays into the end of the movie. There's a couple other red and blue, like, notes throughout the movie. And then there's, at the very end, red teams going forward, blue teams going in reverse. But that's just something else that I really liked. That was...
Yeah, I guess
you'd call it cinematography, but...
I didn't really notice it, but... that's because, you know, this is the first time.
It's one of those things, you know, if you notice it, you do. If you don't, you didn't miss anything.
Yeah, the thing is that what these both Ted and Bud told me was, like, you got to watch it multiple times.
At least
and
twice.
to me, I'm like, well, the film still makes sense after one viewing, but obviously there's more and more and more and more detail and dug out. And that's what I kind of really like about this movie. It's also what I like about John Carpenter's The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing is the same way. Every time I watch that movie, I find more and more, like, new things about it. And I've kind of gotten to the point where I can tell whenever each person is an imitation at what point in the movie. Way before, like, because, like, how they're revealed, they're not revealed in the order that they're imitations, so therefore I can pick up more details on that. While after this movie was, like, done, Bud and Ted were talking about, like, more details with this film that I didn't catch at all.
Right. That speaks to the glory of this film, that if you watch it a second time, knowing what's going on, you will see so much more.
Well,
I just love movies that are so well meticulously put into that there's subtle details that you haven't noticed before that you notice.
Yeah, and
again, it just fleshes everything out even more and more and more, and makes it a very, very repeatable movie-going experience.
And I think too that, like, to build on that, like, when you watch this movie the first time, right? Like you said, it does make sense the first way through, but the longer you think about it, you start to think about things like, well, does that make sense if this, that, and the other, right? Like, you start to think about, and that's the value of watching it the second time, is that it's so good that when you have those questions and you're looking for answers for those specific points, you get your answers, and then you notice more stuff. Like, Bud and I were talking, there's a scene when the protagonist first gets incorporated into this program, right, where he's like, they're testing out the reverse bullets, right, on as like the starting point to his journey. In the grand scheme of things, it probably seems like a throwaway scene, but it does so much for the viewer to be able to establish how things in reverse work. The different objects can be moving different directions through, like, it's a throwaway scene, but it helps you as the viewer make everything else make sense. It explains so many different things that like you would still be questioning about the movie. They do such a good job, like you said, Stahlman, building on it where everything is so cohesive, everything fills in its own gaps. It exists as a standalone piece, and you don't need anything else as background.
Right.
Ted, you want to continue with dislikes and then I go, or you want me to go? I'm not dislikes and likes.
You have at it, because now that I'm looking at the rest of my list, I want to add an addendum to the back end of this podcast that's mostly conjecture. It's not directly about the film, but I think it has to be mentioned as long as we're reviewing.
Yeah.
The thing I also really like about this is homages that I see with different things. It also doesn't help that on a video where they were talking about like why hasn't like there was like a bunch of like weird theories on why like it's taken so long for the next James Bond film to be made, and one of them was Christopher Nolan's making Oppenheimer, so therefore Christopher Nolan's going to be the next director. And it's like, that's not going to happen because typically like that's a producer pushed franchise, and Nolan's, more of a hands-on director as opposed to, doing what the producer tells him to do. That, and also they typically go after people that aren't like nobodies as directors, but like people that are like not like big names like Peter Jackson, or because they said no to Steven Spielberg, so they don't go after people like Christopher Nolan. And one of the comments was, well, Tenet is technically Christopher Nolan's Bond film. And I saw a ton of references to that. Like the whole, where they're explaining like the entropy with like picking up the bullet. That just reminded me of like a Q scene in a James Bond film. Also the car chase with the fire truck reminded me of like the scene from A View to a Kill. But the thing I liked about it was that these different references that I saw are exactly like a shot for shot thing. It wasn't like in
now,
Inception,
if only I actually watched this movie instead.
But it wasn't like Inception where I saw like the back where like the base that they go to do the Inception is exactly like Blofeld's base in on Her Majesty's Secret Service. It's not blatant. It's definitely something inspired, which makes sense with him not wanting to like watch any spy films. He'd rather, do something from memory, and then how the human mind works. You don't remember everything exactly how it goes. So therefore, you kind of fill in the gaps of like, how would you actually, go about doing things. Another thing I have to say, the acting in this is 110% fantastic. Especially from Robert Pattinson and Kenneth Branagh.
He did a great job.
Before I get into Robert Pattinson, I'm going to go with Kenneth Branagh. I thought that was him, but like, I'm just like, no, that can't be him. Like, that accent's way too good, and Kenneth Branagh is very, very British. There's no way that it's like, when I looked at it was Kenneth Branagh, and I'm like, wow, like, well done, It was almost like how I didn't recognize Tom Berenger in Inception. Like, they did a really good job of taking like a I wouldn't say like big name actor, but a fairly well known actor, and then basically altering his appearance enough and his voice enough to the point where he's unrecognizable, kind of like a Gary Oldman syndrome, because of how Gary Oldman or Daniel Day-Lewis, they look different in every movie that they're in. But as for Robert Pattinson, this is the best role that I've ever seen him in. Like, he's almost a scene stealer.
He definitely has his flash, but I as great as his performance is, don't let me detract. I mean, I have to throw the love to the protagonist character too. Like,
oh yeah, John David Washington is great in this as well.
He has the ability to let you know that like without words, he can communicate facially that he either knows more than he's letting on, doesn't know anything, or is goal oriented. Like it's a brilliant performance. I don't know who ended up winning like best lead role for 2020, but like he should have been on the list at the very least because his performance is phenomenal.
I can
But I would argue.
Yeah, they did not get nominated at all, except for best production design, best visual effects, and it won best visual effects.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, this doesn't feel like an Oscars film because they're usually, pretty form-fitting for the most part. But no, I mean, every actor in this just absolutely hit all the right notes. I can't even say that there was anybody who did an average job. Like, everybody went far and above expectation. All of the actors were phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree.
This is one of the few films where, looking at this, it's like, I can't think of, like, a single casting change. Like, I think, like, everybody was cast perfectly for this.
I mean, Kat bothered me because she's 6'3" and tall women are intimidating, but
I think she still did a really good job.
No, her acting was phenomenal. Like, not to make light of it.
I don't think that, I think you could have picked another actor and it wouldn't have had as much, I don't think it would have changed much, but I think that she was still a proper, a casting for that one. I think she did fantastic.
There was learning, there was discovery, there was emotion. Even she hit all the right notes. It's just tall women are scary as hell.
Let's see and my last that I have, I like how when things go backwards and they make references of not references, but they show previous things that were shown at the beginning with it going in reverse, and then it's everything's starting to really make sense that you've already seen things. I love how they don't go clear to the beginning. Because they're just I love how the movie assumes that you already put 2 and 2 together. They said enough.
It treats the viewer as an intelligent human.
Yeah, and the story, as much as this is a non-linear story, you follow one linear path throughout the story, which makes it more appetizing.
Which, I'm done with the likes and dislikes on that. I mean, not dislike, but likes.
Yeah, the only thing I want to piggyback on there from you a little bit before we transition into dislikes, the acting again, as they go into reverse, while acting forward, they all manage to look like they're in reverse. The fight scene where he's fighting himself, one moving forward and one moving backwards.
Good.
Brilliant. I still am not, I'm sure that they
filmed
it twice.
I don't know how you shoot that.
I'm sure they filmed it twice. I'm sure they took bits and pieces, but if you watch it at any given individual moment, one of them is very clearly moving backwards. It's phenomenally acted.
I don't know if it's well choreographed or if it's
I have no idea how
with
they
a
filmed
split screen and one's in reverse and they were able to match it well. I haven't figured that out.
Either way, you have to fight something that's moving backwards. There's no sense of disbelief there. It is fantastically done. Even when he comes out of the turnstile the first time and he's asking questions like, can I drive? He's listening to the birds chirp in reverse. He's stepping into a puddle and the birds chirp in reverse.
Huh.
But they as he steps in a puddle, you watch his foot change motion as though he lifted his foot very quickly, violently after realizing that it's wet, but he's stepping downward. It's just so well acted that you can believe that things are being reversed. It's just the acting for that specific task that happens so frequently is mesmerizing. Hats off to all of them. Dislikes, my list is really short. The only thing that I want to note, I get onto sound and cinematography every time we do this podcast. The music was disorienting. And it wasn't bad necessarily, but Christopher Nolan Christopher Nolan does a very good job typically at keeping music mostly orchestral in the background where it's just enough to have noise. It's not necessarily super impactful. In this one, the music was loud, the music was tense, the music was in your face, and it wasn't. You were going to notice the music. It was going to happen, which just kind of sat in like a very strange place. It was kind of disorienting, and I think most of that complaint is not because the music was aggressive, but because it's not what I expect from Christopher Nolan.
Well, I actually was looking this up while you were talking about this. Apparently, the person that did the music, Ludwig Göransson, was not the first choice. It was actually Hans Zimmer, but he turned down the offer in favor of doing the music for Dune. Now, to come up with the soundtrack, Göransson was researching retrograde composition and experimented with like industrial noise and various other experimental music to basically come up with a soundtrack, which is rather interesting and honestly kind of like makes a little bit of sense to get a tad bit disorienting, but I can think of why it would throw people off, especially if they're used to like a big orchestra.
Yeah, I mean,
orchestras in a film.
It provided,
especially like I guess I could compare it to like a western, like most westerns before like the spaghetti westerns came about, were like the big orchestras, and then when Sergio Leone comes out with like Fistful of Dollars, it's just guitar and whistle.
No, I look, it had its value, right? I mean, Bud and I commented as it was happening that there were like when we were jumping back and forth in time at the same moment in time. I don't know how to actually phrase that. That made my brain hurt. But like it sounded like the same music was being played in reverse while you're watching things in reverse and then shifted back to forwards while all still being one cohesive track. It's not like they just pressed rewind. I recognize
which is probably what they did.
Right. No, it's just like I recognize that it has value, and I'm not here to say that it was outright bad. It was just very bold and in your face. It was hard to ignore. It filled in the gaps where a lot of the action didn't have any dialogue, right? But it just sat in a weird place for me. I won't even say that it's bad. It was just kind of disorienting. But that really, that's the only dislike on my list. Yeah.
Nice. I don't have many dislikes. I think my dislike would probably stem mostly from the gunplay. Like, it didn't feel like their guns don't have a necessarily prominent part in the movie, but when they do, like, they're okay. Like, I feel like there could have been better things done with them. Primarily, I mean, like, bad guy aim, obviously it sucks. Like, sure, like, it always is going to. I did have Ted rewind yesterday when we were watching, after the fact at least, I think at 1 minute and 10 seconds-ish, where Sater and his wife are at the turnstile. He goes through and he picks up one of the guns, and he racks the slide 2 or 3 times, and I'm like, alright, you know what? That's the thing that people do. It's a way of checking the gun, although it's not, in my opinion, a correct way to check the gun. It works, but he had his finger on the trigger the entire time. Where's your trigger discipline, my guy?
Yeah, admittedly, the guns were
does
props.
The gun dealer or the guy who is literally made of money because reverse people are sending it to him is going to care about trigger discipline? Probably not. Am I? Yeah. Yeah, I am. I'm a gun nut. I like guns, but I also like practicing gun safety, and so I look for those things. I think both the protagonist and Neil both exercised trigger discipline, but like I said, the guns weren't there very often, and the gunplay was, I wouldn't say sloppy, but wasn't very interesting either. Not that it would have been a main point. It's not like a John Wick film. Yeah. But so if I had a complaint, it would have been with the gunplay.
So what you're saying is that taking a 50 cal and shooting a big, huge bucket of tannerite that's about 2 feet in front of you is not proper gun safety.
The apathy on Bud's face is your answer.
That doesn't deserve a response. Like, no fucking shit. Duh. Anyways, but I don't really have any other dislikes. Like, I think the acting was done well. I never paid attention to the sound design or the music very closely, so I can't say I liked or disliked it. Yeah. I think maybe if I were to complain, it'd be in the first scene where you interact with reverse objects, where he's like the bullet scene. And this is because this opinion is stemmed from the first and the second time I watched it. It's more or less culled by the third and fourth watch, because it does continue to make more sense the more you watch it. But I feel when I first saw the film, that scene, in my opinion, did not teach me what was going on in the movie nearly as well as just watching the movie, and I felt like there was a bit of a disconnect there, personally. But, I mean, again, third, fourth watch, it all starts to really make a lot of sense, so I can't really even call it a dislike. So, that's all I've got.
Alright, so, here we go. I have 2 dislikes. Alright. One, I'm kind of sick of seeing Michael Caine. You don't understand, bud.
No, we've seen him.
I don't, and I don't think I care.
He's been in every movie we've watched since the first Batman movie, and he was there for 2 fucking sentences to then just leave. His worth here was exactly nothing. Last time in fucking Dunkirk, he was a voice over an airplane that was uncredited, and for some goddamn reason, they still brought him in to do the work. Tired of Michael Caine.
Got it. Fair enough.
Which honestly wouldn't be that big of a problem if we weren't watching all these back to back.
Accurate.
Sounds like a you problem.
It is absolutely an us problem.
Yeah. The other one is I still don't know who the hell the tenant of the apartment is.
I'm kicking Stahlman in his fucking teeth.
Sorry, I had to meme, but no, in all honesty, besides the Michael Caine thing, I can't really think of any dislikes on this.
Alrighty, well that's great. Thanks for coming to this podcast. Y'all have a great night.
No, there is like conjecture that I've read a lot of times. I mean, this movie is not well rated or reviewed if you get online, and I think part of that is that it's not necessarily appetizing for a first-time viewer. Like, I don't agree, but I can understand it. It's not a movie that you can watch casually. It's not a movie that you can just go brain dead. Like, you're gonna have to think.
You need to be actively engaged with.
Yep, and you need to be thinking critically. Like,
which is why I muted these 2 while watching.
True,
hey, we warned you.
Stallman watched the whole thing on deaf mute. I respect that choice, as a matter of fact. So I think that wraps us up for likes and dislikes. I want to get into some conjecture about this movie before we totally move away, because I couldn't talk about this movie without getting into all of that. So if you intend to see the movie and don't want spoilers, you can let it go now. But there is a theory that's been posted numerous places that I have a very difficult time disproving, that I feel like needs to get talked about here. There is so at the end of the movie, the conclusion of the conflict, Neil says to the protagonist that the protagonist recruits him in the future. Neil has gone his forward time span, coming backwards to then meet up with the protagonist, right? And they just kind of loop each other in here. There is conjecture that the way that the protagonist meets Neil to recruit him is that Neil is Kat's son. It gets brought up a couple of times that she has a son. And every time Neil just kind of passes the buck. Neil has also spent enough time with the protagonist that Neil knows the protagonist better than he should way earlier on in the film, because the protagonist has gone through, theoretically, his whole life overlooking Kat and Kat's son, presumed to then be Neil, that Neil would know these things with the protagonist around all of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason that I wanted to bring this up, and it didn't quite belong in likes or dislikes, The like is that it's really complex and convoluted, doesn't need to necessarily go in the movie for that theory to appear. I think it's cool that the movie has layers outside of what you can visibly see.
But it makes total fucking sense.
Right, it makes too much sense. I can't find anything to talk me out of it. No matter how many times I watch this movie, I think it just solidifies things more and more for me that that's actually the case.
I'm willing to believe it. I can't think of anything that would immediately disprove that.
Right. And the dislike for me then with that is more just that, like, I have to assume it. Right?
Right.
That it's present enough that you can craft these kinds of theories while watching, but it's not present enough that they give you that information. This movie would be very difficult to create a sequel or any follow-up pieces, any external, I would
hate that.
Right, no, it's a mastercraft in and of its own.
I mean, they
could, but it wouldn't be this. I'd be disappointed.
Right? I would be disappointed with a sequel no matter what.
No, I'm not saying that they could. I don't know how the hell they could, because they basically tie all the loose ends.
They wrap it up themselves. I mean, like, you could probably have something going on later in the future where Neil is more inexperienced and the protagonist is the more experienced one, and play the reverse role there, where, you know, the protagonist would be Neil's handler.
Right,
where
but
in this one, Neil is the protagonist's handler.
But I feel I feel like they've already kind of closed that loop without giving it to you, though, because when he's in the car with Priya and says, "I realized you and I were both working for me the whole time. I'm the protagonist." Like, he's closing his own loose ends, like adding more loose ends in a second film to interject more into that loop. Like, it's never going to happen.
Ruins what the original movie established.
Right.
And spoiler, like,
this whole podcast is a spoiler.
Like, you do see him freaking shoot himself in reverse. So therefore he technically, like, ties the loose end by killing himself at the beginning of the movie.
What? He doesn't kill himself in the beginning of the movie. He thinks he's going to, but the pill is it doesn't actually
No. Like, he gets shot with the reverse bullet in the arm.
Yeah.
He shoots himself with the reverse bullet, so therefore the reverse entropy radiation stuff with the bullet eventually is going to kill him, because
he's not shot with a reverse bullet. He is shot by a normal bullet while going in reverse.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, also you watch the thing like reopen itself when they're traveling backwards before they go back to the turnstile in Oslo again.
Exactly.
That's like
he's like through his skin.
Are you injured? And then by the time they get out of the shipping container, he's actively bleeding because the wound is fresher. They're approaching where the wound comes in. Like, that's got nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I assume that's just him.
And
that was
what's her face? The wife, whose name I already forgot. She is shot with a reverse bullet, and they keep her alive
by going in reverse.
In reverse.
Yeah. Well, technically, she has a bullet sucked out of her through the wall, but yes.
True, but that's where that yes, and that's another thing. Like I said, the gunplay felt weird, and I would lump that stuff into the gunplay that was both and I think could have been explained better, but I digress.
All right, so yeah, I guess there is, because I was thinking, like, well, I mean, with loose ends, like, everybody, like, basically just, like, offs themselves, dies, but
the only real things that don't get tied up into this movie, right? The only things that I think you could build anything else off of are what happens to the algorithm after the fact, because you know that the idea is that the algorithm is moving backwards in time so that Sator can reassemble them, and at what point the protagonist decides to recruit himself in to loop back in time so that he can start the process to where he gets to recruiting himself. Like, those are the only two, and genuinely, they could do that with a fucking blog post with 15 minutes of typing. They can't build upon this after the fact, so it's weird that they give you
matter.
Right. It's not worth it for them to do it. Like, I'm not expecting it. I don't miss it that it's not here. All I'm saying is that, like, they give you the morsel of, I guess, Kat's son could be Neil, but they never do anything about it, and they never do anything to disprove it. In fact, I would argue that they do things to encourage that kind of theory. Like, even my son will die. You should go back to sleep, lady. Like,
Yeah.
I think it goes with note that it's not necessarily a positive or a negative. It fucks me up a little. Can't talk about this movie without talking about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, but otherwise, like, I'm content.
Yeah, absolutely terrific. I know you haven't watched the rest of them, bud, so usually at the end of this, we rank them and stick them in order. This one's easy for me. Top of the list. First, done. Easy peasy, no questions asked.
I agree.
1 of 1. Stahlman, what you got? I see your fucking angry looking shrew of a smirk. Just fucking spit it out. This is an audio medium, sunshine.
All right. So I'll tell you this much: I definitely didn't. I had a hard time ranking this. I knew that this was definitely better than Memento, just because despite it was not as jarring as that movie is. Especially with telling a unique way of telling a non-linear story. I wasn't sure if this was actually higher than The Dark Knight or not, and to me, I think it is, because this is one of those movies that it's a perfect film, and The Dark Knight is up there, and I'm not sure if it's, because you were saying this before, after we were done record a podcast, Ted, you were just yeah, I'm not sure if followings should be this high, if I'm really just having it this high because it's new,
Yeah.
And to me, it's I've watched The Dark Knight so many times where it's yeah, it's a really good film. This is new to me, but it's I got a lot more excitement if this came on, as opposed to The Dark Knight.
Fair.
Not saying that I would be The Dark Knight. No, I'd still watch it oh, cool, The Dark Knight. But I would have a hell of a lot more excitement with this. And I think they're both on par with each other. I'm just more excited to watch Tenet than I had a better movie going experience, which isn't really much as a actual film critique on that, but I think the essential thing about a movie is whether the audience enjoys it, whether somebody's watching it actually has a good watching experience. And to me, that watching experience was a lot greater with this film than with The Dark Knight.
Yeah, I respect that. All right, so I think that's going to wrap us up. We're just short of an hour already because, goddamn, we have a lot to talk about for this movie. So this is going to wrap up, at least temporarily, the Christopher Nolan series. We will do a podcast for Oppenheimer when it releases in July, as soon as we have access to it. But for now, this is going to wrap us up.
Yeah, we'll make the announcement.
Yeah, sure. How about it?
All right. So, in the meantime, we are going to pick up with a different director, and Ted and I both decided to go with a director that we both are very familiar with, and is also an auteur director as Christopher Nolan is, and that is going to be Mr. Stanley Kubrick.
Yay, cheers. I would have had production value. Yay.
Hey, he faked the moon landing.
Yeah, listen, so we'll pick up Kubrick. Podcast wise, you probably see it next week, I think. There may be a 1 week gap. I still have to do math and count, and numbers are hard. Anyway, want to say, as always, thank you guys for joining us. You can hop in, watch movies with us in the Discord. By the time you see this, we'll probably be watching Kubrick movies. I also plan to do another watch party. All right, Stahlman's got to go. Another watch party of Tenet at some point. In the meantime, follow us all on Twitch. Buddy at Bud_word, Ted, myself at Ted Green Eagles, and Stahlman.
I don't stream very much anymore.
You just do the thing. Now my graphics are broken because I had it set up for 3, but it looks goofy as hell. But Stahlman's got to leave, so you can follow him as well at Traductus. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks Bud for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me.
Always. Adios, y'all. See you next week.